My name is Paige. I am 26 years old. And on the night my family decided I was nothing more than a burden, they made sure of one thing: the whole world would witness how they destroyed me. I drove home after an exhausting day at work, my mind still reeling from client deadlines. But as soon as I turned into the driveway, my heart plummeted into an abyss. Right before my eyes, my entire life lay scattered across the front lawn. Clothes were thrown everywhere. My laptop, the tool of my livelihood, was shattered, the screen cracked and broken. Work documents were torn to shreds, fluttering in the wind like my last shreds of hope. The desk where I'd worked through countless nights, now reduced to a pile of splintered wood. My father stood right in the middle of that battlefield, swinging a hammer to smash whatever remnants were left, his face twisted in unhidden rage. My sister stood beside him, holding her phone high to live stream, capturing close-up shots of every blow, every fragment, laughing as the endless stream of comments scrolled by. My brother leaned against the porch, arms crossed, wearing a contemptuous smirk, as if this was the best entertainment he'd seen in months. Then my father turned straight toward the camera, roaring loud enough for the microphone to capture every word. 26 years old and utterly useless, leeching off me like a tumor. Get out of my house right now. My brother chimed in, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Finally, the useless trash is gone. Hundreds of people were watching. Neighbors peeked through their curtains. Comments flooded the screen, some gloating, others mocking, treating my pain like entertainment. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't say a single word. I quietly stepped through the wreckage, picking up whatever could still be salvaged: my wallet, my keys, a few notebooks that hadn't been completely destroyed. I put them in the car and drove away in the pouring rain. In that moment, they believed they'd gotten rid of their failed child forever. They thought that film spectacle was their victory, proof to the world that they were right, and I was worthless. But they had no idea that a year later they would be the ones constantly calling me, messaging in desperation, begging me to come back. If you want to know how that useless daughter could make her entire family tremble with just one sentence, stay with me. If you like this story, please subscribe and turn on notifications. It truly means a lot to me. Your support is the reason these family drama stories keep getting told. Thank you so much. They thought throwing me out on the street and destroying my life on camera was the end of my story. But they had no idea. That was just the beginning of theirs. 1 year before the night they destroyed my life on camera, my life, at least in the eyes of outsiders, still looked pretty decent. I lived alone in a small one-bedroom apartment in Philadelphia. It wasn't luxurious, it wasn't glamorous, but it was a space I'd built for myself with my own hands. I drove an old Toyota, reliable in its own way, even though the check engine light had basically never agreed to turn off. I freelanced in marketing and content creation for a mid-sized agency downtown. The income wasn't high, but it was enough to cover rent, bills, groceries, and even save a small amount. I was proud of that. I didn't owe anyone my existence. Then everything collapsed. The economy faltered. Clients canceled contracts one after another. Campaigns vanished overnight as if they'd never existed. One afternoon, I got an invitation to an online meeting from my main contact, her face wearing the familiar forced smile of someone about to deliver bad news. "It's not personal," she said. "We're having to let go of most of our freelancers." Just one sentence, and my livelihood was gone. The weeks that followed were a string of desperate days. I applied everywhere, took odd jobs that didn't even cover gas money. Every time I opened my bank account, my heart tightened. The rent notice came then, the final one. I calculated and recalculated, hoping the numbers would change, but they didn't. My savings wouldn't last another month. Moving back in with my dad was supposed to be a temporary solution. He lived in a quiet suburb near Philadelphia, in the very house where I grew up. We agreed I'd stay in the basement, pay $400 a month, and pick up extra shifts at a nearby bar to get by while job hunting. In theory, it was a reasonable plan. But deep down, I knew I was taking a step backward. My dad Timothy never missed a chance to turn it into his own act of generosity. He posted in the family group chat, told his friends he was helping his grown daughter get back on her feet after life had crushed her. At gatherings, he'd sigh dramatically. Paige is staying with me for a while. Times are tough for the kids these days. It sounded noble. It sounded like he was the hero. But behind closed doors, the tone was entirely different. Every time he passed the basement, he'd drop a comment loud enough for me to hear, 26 years old and back here already. Every time I handed over the rent money, he'd count each bill slowly as if doubting their existence, then coldly remind me that utilities aren't free. My sister Brianna lived on her own downtown, but came over often to film content. She'd set up her ring light in the living room, talking to her thousands of followers about cozy family weekends and loving Sunday dinners. She carefully angled the camera so I never appeared in frame. If I accidentally showed up for a few seconds, I'd be edited out before the video went live. I gradually became a shadow in my own family. My brother Landon would stop by after work at the auto shop, still smelling of grease on his clothes. He'd slap me hard on the back, smirking, "How's the freelance artist doing? Still waiting for that big break." He said it like a joke, but every word cut deep. The basement wasn't bad, a cramped sleeping area, a mini fridge, a bathroom so small it was hard to turn around in. I set up a folding table as my workspace, staying up late, refining my portfolio, tweaking my resume, applying for every remaining opportunity. The Wi-Fi was weak, pages loaded slowly, but I kept going. Every night I fell asleep to the sound of my dad's TV seeping down from upstairs, telling myself it's only temporary. Some nights, coming home from the bar shift reeking of beer and fryer oil, I'd overhear him complaining on the phone about the higher water bill, about the dryer running more. Each complaint gnawed at me, reminding me I was a burden. I avoided everyone, kept to myself, pouring all my energy into one single goal: getting out. And then, one morning, it happened. I was sitting at the folding table, cold coffee beside me, when the email appeared. A company in Pittsburgh was very impressed with my portfolio. They were offering a long-term freelance contract, stable work, high pay, and the potential to go full-time. The highest rate I'd ever been offered. My hands shook as I read every line. In that moment, I knew this was my way out. I jumped up, heart pounding, and headed upstairs to tell my dad. I had no idea. That very moment would ignite the biggest nightmare of my life. I rushed up to the kitchen, my heart pounding with excitement. Dad was standing at the counter, wiping up after breakfast. I couldn't hold it in any longer. "Dad, I got it," I said, trying not to let my smile show too obviously. "A company in Pittsburgh just offered me a long-term freelance contract. Remote work, stable hours, and the pay is higher than any job I've ever had. They even said if things go well, I could go full-time." He slowly set down the sponge and turned to look at me. For one brief moment, I thought I might see joy. But his face went cold. He looked me straight in the eye, his voice flat and cruel. "Freelance isn't a real job, Paige. Don't get your hopes up. People like you need discipline. You need someone overseeing you to actually accomplish anything." Those words hit me harder than I expected. "People like you?" I forced a smile, pretending it was just one of his usual remarks. "It's a proper contract, Dad. Fully signed. This could really change my life." He didn't ask to see the contract. He didn't ask about the company. He didn't ask about the salary. He just shook his head and turned back to wiping the same spot on the counter as if I hadn't even existed. I've heard stories like this before. You'll see. I stood there for a few more seconds, feeling the excitement drain out of me. There was something in his tone that wasn't like the other times, not just skepticism. It was resentment, as if he was annoyed at the possibility that I might not need him anymore. I went back down to the basement, printed out the contract for a hard copy, placed it on my desk, and went to make coffee. And right then, Brianna appeared. She knocked lightly on the basement door and poked her head in. "Hey, do you have an extra ring light? Mine died in the middle of a shoot." "Yeah, it's over there in the corner," I said, pointing. She grabbed the light but didn't leave right away. Her eyes scanned the room, the familiar look she got whenever she was hunting for content ideas. Her gaze landed on the stack of papers I'd just printed. She picked it up casually, flipping through the pages. I saw her pause at the compensation section, her eyebrows raising slightly. "Nice," she said. But the smile didn't reach her eyes. She put the contract back exactly where it had been and left with the light. The rest of the day felt strange. At dinner, Dad barely spoke to me. If I tried to start a conversation, he only gave short grunts in response. He stared at his phone more than usual, scrolling through Brianna's posts where she often tagged him in her family content pictures of him grilling, fixing things around the house with captions like, "Grateful for a dad who always sacrifices for the family." By evening, everything started clicking into place in my mind. Dad had built a perfect image for his friends and, online, a hard-working single father carrying his failed daughter through a tough time. That image earned him sympathy like praise for his generosity. If I managed to stand on my own, that narrative would collapse. He would no longer be the hero. Just a man whose grown daughter left. Because she finally could. Brianna showing him the contract must have been the final straw. By afternoon, the atmosphere in the house was thick, like the calm before a storm. Dad avoided me completely, but I overheard him on the phone upstairs, his voice low, talking about handling things the right way and letting everyone see the truth. I had no idea how far he would go, until that night. I drove home after running a quick errand, tired but still clinging to a faint hope that he might come around once he realized how serious the offer was. But when I stepped out of the car, what I faced wasn't reconciliation. It was the chaos waiting for me on the front lawn. I drove without stopping until I pulled up in front of Mackenzie's house, barely remembering how I'd gotten there. She opened the door, and the moment she saw me, soaked from the rain, trembling all over, she pulled me inside without a single question. I dropped my bag on the sofa, collapsed into it, and stared at the floor. When I finally opened my mouth, everything poured out uncontrollably, the hammer swinging in my father's hands. Brianna live streaming, Landon spewing sarcasm, hundreds of people watching like it was some cruel form of entertainment. Mackenzie didn't interrupt. She opened her laptop, tracked down the live stream, and quickly found a recording someone had saved before Brianna could delete it. We sat side by side watching in silence. On the screen was my father roaring into the camera, my belongings being smashed on the lawn, and then the camera panned across the work area where the printed stack of my contract lay crumpled as if someone had picked it up, read it carefully, and then thrown it away. "So they knew," I whispered. Brianna showed him the numbers. He saw I was about to stand on my own, and instead of accepting that, he turned it into this. Mackenzie paused the video and zoomed in on each page of the contract. They planned it. This wasn't spontaneous. We sat in silence for a long time. The pain was still raw, burning, but something else started creeping in, bewilderment. "Why go this far?" Mackenzie stood up, went into the spare room, and came back with an old cardboard box. "This was mailed to you a few years after your grandfather passed. You were in a really bad place then. Remember, you asked me to hold on to it because you weren't ready to face anything from that time." I looked at the box. 5 years ago, right after the funeral. My grandfather was the only one who had always believed in me, always talked about responsibility, about building something lasting. I'd been too deep in grief to open any mail that came afterward. Mackenzie had kept it all these years. "Open it," she said, her voice softening. I lifted the lid. Inside was a sealed envelope from a law office and a smaller one with my name in my grandfather's handwriting. My hands shook as I opened the lawyer's letter first. It was short and clear, a copy of the will and instructions to contact them if I hadn't already. The will was spelled out so plainly it sent a chill through me. He had left me ownership shares in 3 assets: 40% of the house my father was living in, 60% of an apartment building in Pittsburgh with steady rental income, 35% of Landon's auto repair shop. At the bottom of the page was a handwritten note from him. Paige gets this share because she sees things as they truly are. Protect it if others won't. I read it again, then again, and a third time. My father had never mentioned it. Not once in 5 years. The rent money from Pittsburgh regular checks that could have saved me months ago had been going somewhere else. The house I was paying rent to live in, I owned nearly half of it. The auto shop Landon bragged about expanding, part of it was built on assets in my name. Mackenzie read over my shoulder, her voice dropping low. They've been hiding this from you the whole time. That same night, I called the number in the letter. Mrs. Hayes answered on the second ring, calm and professional. She confirmed everything. The will was legally executed and fully valid. Income from the Pittsburgh apartments had been routed to accounts controlled by my father. Every decision made without my involvement, loans, changes, mortgages, could be challenged. She asked a few questions, listened to my summary, and said we would quietly gather the records. When I hung up, the pain hadn't gone away. The humiliation on the lawn still burned. But beneath it, something else was forming: a cold, clear, purposeful anger. My grandfather hadn't left me this will to cause drama. He left it as armor, as leverage. Storming back to the house and waving papers in their faces would only turn me into a character in another one of their performances. They'd twist the story, play the victims again. No, I wouldn't give them that. Instead, I focused on what I could control. I threw myself into the new contract, working until exhaustion. I found a small studio apartment in Philadelphia, nothing special, but it was mine alone. No footsteps overhead, no complaints about the electric bill. I moved in with whatever I'd managed to salvage, and a few minimal new things. The first months were about rebuilding in silence. The work steadied. My portfolio improved. Projects followed one after another. Mrs. Hayes checked in occasionally, quietly assembling the paperwork behind the scenes. I didn't block my family. I just didn't respond to my father's casual messages as if nothing had ever happened. I needed time to stand firmly, time for the legal side to take shape without interference. And then, very slowly, the life I was building on my own terms began to truly take shape. A year passed faster than I expected. My new life gradually settled into a simple rhythm, and one that was entirely my own. I woke up in my small studio in Philadelphia, sunlight filtering through the window. I brewed coffee in a kitchen I paid for myself, worked at a real desk with no one overhead. The Pittsburgh contract grew into a steady stream of projects, enough to comfortably cover all my bills and build savings. New clients came through referrals. I even turned down projects that no longer fit. For the first time in my life, stability didn't feel temporary. One afternoon, Mrs. Hayes called with an update. Everything was ready. She had sent formal legal letters to my father's address, Landon's auto repair shop, and Brianna's content management company, clear lawful demands regarding my ownership shares, and the 5 years of withheld rental income from the Pittsburgh property. Copies were also sent to the bank handling the related loans. At first, nothing happened. A quiet week went by. I focused on deadlines, went to the gym, lived as if everything was normal. Then my phone started lighting up constantly. It began with angry messages from Dad demanding I call him back, accusing me of tearing the family apart over money that Grandpa intended for him to manage. Brianna followed with long paragraphs about betrayal, about how ungrateful I was after everything they'd done for me. Landon sent short, icy lines calling my lawyer harassment and telling me to leave his shop alone. I read them all. I didn't respond. Day by day, the tone shifted. Anger turned to confusion, then to pleading. Dad asked where I was living, if I needed any help, as if that night on the lawn had never happened. Brianna sent voice notes saying we should talk privately, that siblings don't need lawyers. Landon offered to settle it quietly if I'd just back off. The messages piled up over 100 in less than 2 weeks. The family group chats I'd long muted suddenly came alive, flooded with photos of the lawyer's letters and relatives' opinions. Then Brianna took it public. She posted a series of TikTok videos, perfect lighting, tears falling at just the right angle, talking about a family member suing her own father over inheritance, threatening her brother's livelihood. No names, but enough details for followers to piece it together from her old posts. Comments exploded, siding with her, calling the unnamed sibling greedy and heartless. Some even dug up my professional profiles, leaving toxic reviews questioning my credibility as a freelancer. The pressure tightened day by day. I kept working. I stayed silent and forwarded everything to Mrs. Hayes. One evening, as I carried groceries home from the store, Landon appeared. He was leaning against his pickup truck parked at the curb, arms crossed, his face gaunt like he hadn't slept in days. "We need to talk," he said, stepping in front of me. I stopped, keeping my voice calm. "Anything you want to say it to my lawyer." He laughed, but it was forced. "Come on, Paige. This tough act has gone on long enough. Just sign a paper saying you don't want the shop or those rental units, and it'll all end. The bank stops calling. Everyone moves on." I shifted the grocery bags in my arms. "I'm not giving up what Grandpa left me just because you've been using it without asking." His face tightened. He slammed his hand against the wall right beside me, close enough for me to feel the vibration. "You'll destroy everything he built. If you keep this up, you'll regret it. No one in this family will ever forgive you." For one brief moment, the old habit rose up, wanting to appease to avoid conflict. Then I remembered the hammer, the camera, the laughter. I pulled out my phone and held it up so he could see the recording light on. "Are you done?" He stared at the screen, swore under his breath, and turned away. Tires screeched as his truck peeled off the curb. That night, the signs of collapse became clearer. Dad left a voicemail in a panicked voice about the bank's questions regarding the Pittsburgh loans. Brianna's video views started dropping as comments began questioning inconsistencies in her story. I sent the recording and all the messages to Mrs. Hayes without a single explanation. A few days later, she called back. Her voice was calm, certain. "We have more than enough now. This harassment only strengthens your position. Whenever you're ready, we'll take the next step." And for the first time since that rainy night, I smiled, not because of victory, but because I knew. Finally, the scales had tipped in my favor. While my family continued shouting and attacking each other online, Mrs. Hayes worked quietly. She dug deep into every record, every figure. Bank statements laid bare the stark truth: large loans secured against the Pittsburgh apartments taken out in my father's and Landon's names, without a single signature from me, without ever asking permission, without a single notice. Part of that money had been used to renovate the house, a new kitchen countertop, a wooden deck that Dad had bragged about to the neighbors as his proud achievement. The rest had quietly flowed into Landon's shop, saving it from collapse during months of plunging revenue. Mrs. Hayes presented it all neatly, coldly, and without emotion. Clear violations, the law on my side, and the 5 years of withheld rental income, a sum large enough to silence anyone. No rush, no noise, just the truth peeled away layer by layer. Then my father tried a different move. An invitation came through relatives, a family meeting at the old house just to talk like adults. The words were soft, falsely warm, as if none of the cracks had ever existed. Brianna quickly followed with messages saying the whole family should meet in person. No lawyers, no tension, just family. I knew exactly what it was. Mrs. Hayes did too. When she reviewed the agreement, they'd already prepared a simple document asking me to relinquish all my rights, prettily called preserving harmony. Any illusion vanished. I didn't respond to them. I let my lawyer do it. A polite, concise email declining the meeting. All future communication through legal representatives. Then the consequences started touching them. No longer Just words. The bank froze the credit lines tied to the Pittsburgh building due to the missing co-owner's signature. Notices were sent. Alarms went off. Tenants called the management company asking who was now responsible. Rumors of the ownership dispute had spread. One even threatened to withhold rent until everything was clarified. My father's messages changed tone again. No longer angry, just panicked. He left voicemails, voice trembling, talking about questions from the bank, about how empty the house felt, about how he missed me during the holidays. He kept bringing up Grandpa, saying he would never have wanted this to happen, that family has to stick together no matter what. Brianna's online image began to crack. Her followers slowly dropped. Comments asked questions, dug up old videos, pointed out inconsistencies. Brands went silent. No new collaborations. She posted less, and when she did, the tears no longer convinced anyone. Landon was the most terrified. His messages came in waves, warnings that the shop couldn't survive without that capital, pleading with me to think of the employees, reminding me of the layoffs that would happen if the loans were cut off. I read them all. And I didn't reply. Those words tugged at old strings inside me, guilt, fear of being seen as cruel. But then I remembered the hammer, remembered the camera rolling, remembered how they had laughed and declared themselves right. Each time the hesitation weakened a little more. Mrs. Hayes remained steady as stone. Short calls, another document confirmed, another inconsistency noted. She reminded me that the timing was mine to decide, but the case was already rock solid. My father made one last attempt. A handwritten letter arrived at my apartment, tight, dense script filling the page. He wrote about years of financial pressure, about raising us alone, about sacrifices. He said he had only done what he thought was best to keep everything from falling apart. At the end, he asked me to come home just once, no papers, no arguments. I folded the letter, placed it in the file, and told Mrs. Hayes I was ready. The lawsuit was filed shortly after. A court date was set. And for the first time in a very long while, I slept deeply, not because it was all over, but because I knew I was no longer running. The court date finally arrived. I walked into the courtroom with a strange sensation, half resolute, half numb. Mrs. Hayes strode beside me, her tailored suit like invisible armor. Across the aisle sat my family. My father, Timothy, stooped, his hair far grayer than I remembered. Brianna avoiding my eyes, twisting a tissue into knots. Landon staring at the table as if it had personally betrayed him. The trial unfolded quickly, coldly, almost brutally. Mrs. Hayes presented the case with absolute precision. Grandpa's indisputable will, the concealed inheritance, the unauthorized mortgages and loans taken against assets I co-owned, the rental income siphoned off for personal spending and to rescue failing businesses. Bank statements, notarized documents, timestamps, everything formed a picture so clear it was impossible to deny deliberate exclusion and abuse. Their side collapsed under cross-examination. Vague excuses about misunderstandings or family rights evaporated against evidence as hard as steel. The judge's ruling came swiftly and decisively, every one of my claims upheld. Immediate restitution ordered, asset liquidation to restore fairness. The real-world consequences hit them hard in the months that followed. The Pittsburgh apartment building, tied up by those secret loans, was forced into sale. After debts and fees were settled, the remaining proceeds were divided strictly by ownership percentage. My 60% share became a solid capital base carefully invested for long-term security. The family home, with 40% legally mine, also went to public auction to resolve the remaining claims. In the rush, it sold for a modest sum, leaving Timothy just enough for a difficult fresh start. Landon's shop crumbled next. Once the illicit funding was stripped away, debt swallowed operations whole. Creditors seized assets, customers fled amid the scandal, and bankruptcy became inevitable. The business he had proudly expanded shut its doors for good, leaving him unemployed and carrying personal liabilities. Brianna's social media empire turned to smoke. Major brands terminated contracts overnight, desperate to avoid any connection to the public family lawsuit. Algorithms buried her content as engagement plummeted. Followers left in waves, exhausted by the drama or disillusioned by exposed contradictions. Income vanished, forcing her to abandon the influencer life she had chased so fiercely. Timothy shrank into a cramped one-bedroom rental in a quiet, unremarkable neighborhood, far from the suburban house he once treated as his kingdom. Landon drifted between temporary jobs and friends' couches. Brianna all but disappeared from public view, her once bright profiles falling silent. Then desperation drove them back to me. Apology letters arrived, first Timothy writing about lost years and mistakes born of fear. Brianna sent long, rambling emails pleading for understanding and a small loan to pivot her career. Landon texted sporadically, bluntly asking for seed money to start over or simply to survive until steady work appeared. Every message circled the same core plea: one final act of family mercy to help them rise from the ruins. After careful thought, I agreed to a single meeting only with Timothy, arranged strictly through Mrs. Hayes in her firm's secure conference room, monitored, time-limited, no surprises permitted. He arrived, looking frail. Minutes later, Brianna and Landon walked in anyway, ignoring every rule, and sat down. Tears flowed as Timothy began, his voice breaking while recounting the burdens of single parenthood and financial panic. Brianna followed, speaking of the loneliness of sudden invisibility and begging for sisterly compassion. Landon added curt promises of repayment, stressing blood ties and what he claimed Grandpa would have wanted. They pressed every emotional button: holiday memories, the idea that real families heal, assurances that lessons had been learned. I stayed calm, letting their words hang until the room fell completely silent. Finally, I looked them in the eye and spoke my only real sentence of the meeting. Being family didn't give you the right to destroy my life. This ends here forever. I stood, gathered my things, and walked out. No glance back. No further words. Immediately afterward, I severed every remaining tie, blocked numbers, filtered emails, removed shared contacts. Absolute silence. That final cut brought a profound clarity: family, whether by blood or name, is not automatically safe or loving. Some bonds become cages of expectation and harm, maintained under the mask of loyalty. Protecting yourself is not betrayal, it is self-respect. When a relationship demands you shrink your worth or accept destruction, walking away completely is not only justified, it is necessary. Today, my world feels wide open and peaceful. Mornings begin on my terms in a sun-filled apartment arranged exactly as I want it. My career moves forward steadily, challenging projects, reliable income, full creative control. Savings grow, travel plans take shape, genuine relationships bloom without hidden motives. Evenings are for quiet or laughter with people I choose. No shadows of dread remain. When the phone rings now, it is always something or someone I welcome. Or I simply let it ring if I want to be alone. I have built an independence that is solid and joyful, rooted in boundaries I defend without apology. The past no longer haunts me, it illuminates a future that is completely, unshakably mine.